I'm just now getting ready to start doing some covering work. I'm going to try to do the vertical stabilizer first. I just wanted to get a couple things documented here before I get started. This is just a menagerie of the various tools and pieces, parts that I'll be making use of during the covering. I've got my infrared thermometer here for calibrating the irons, pinking shears, some Dixie cups for the glue, homemade needle. This needle was made from 3/32, I think it's copper welding rod. I flattened the end, put a hole in it for the thread, put a point on it and curved it. Some regular masking tape, X-Acto knife, various brushes, measuring things. I've got my glue and my tapes in this box here. I've got my roll of fabric here. There's the vertical stabilizer that I'm going to work on. Here's one of the irons. This is a hanger 9 iron. And I've already masked it off on top and put a couple marks on it for my calibrated temperatures. It's not an exact science. Different areas on this iron end up being different temperatures at any given setting. Usually the tip is cooler than back here at the heel. And it cycles on and off, so you can see my markings are basically, they're not exact, but I've got, you know, this mark here is at least 150, this mark here is at least 300. But once I start using it and I get a feel for how it works with the fabric, I may change those a little bit. But so like I said, I'm just getting started. This is all new to me. This is my first shot at it, and I'm going to start putting some glue down and get the fabric cut and see what we can do. So far so good on the vertical stabilizer. This part is now finished except for the rib stitching and the finishing tapes. It actually came out quite well. I am very pleased with it, and it was simpler to do than I had expected. I thought it was going to be a little bit more involved and a little bit harder to actually do, but I'm using the Stewart Systems Echo Bond for the glue, and I've watched the videos that they have available, the tutorial videos that they have on their website. Goes step by step through the procedure on how to do the covering, the gluing, the finishing tapes, how to shrink the fabric around these kind of tight radiuses. Outstanding videos. I actually have my iPad out here with me, and I watch the videos as I go, and that was a real big help. There's really nothing more I could add to those if you watch the videos and follow them, and of course read the Stewart Systems manual. It's a PDF that you can print. That pretty much explains the procedure, and I'm quite frankly not going to take the time to do that here because it's kind of pointless when the information is available, and it's better than anything that I could produce. But having said that, having used those resources and follow the videos and the directions in the manual, this is what I've got. This is already shrunk, the final shrinkage. This has been shrunk with a 350-degree iron, give or take, both sides. Let me see if I can pick this up. I've already started on this side to put the reinforcing tape on, because I'm going to do the rib stitching next. But here it is. So far so good, as I said, and I'm going to do the stitching next. I've got my vertical stabilizer clamped into this newly purchased work type table. I've got the stitching done, and I've got the finishing tapes over top of the stitches. Right now I've got some glue on this surface here, and I've got some glue on this surface here as well that is drying. I'm going to let that tack up and dry really well, and then I'll start doing the finishing tape around the perimeter. So while that's setting up, I'm going to come over here and start working on the rudder itself. This is all ready to be covered, and since I don't want to sit around waiting for the glue to dry, literally, I'm going to go ahead and start laying out the fabric and pre-gluing the rudder. So I'll get going on that, and then I'll come back and get everybody caught up. I've started covering the rudder, and you can see that I've got the first side on. This is the first shrink setting. This is the initial shrink, the 250-degree shrink. I've got everything glued in place, obviously, because I've already shrunk it. And I'm getting ready to pre-glue the perimeter yet again so I can start on the other side. I just wanted to get some video here of it so far. Here is the horn, the rudder horn, and you can see that I did not put any kind of wood structure around the horn, so there was nothing for the fabric to glue to. This started out as a simple slit, but then of course when I shrunk it, it opened up. And I'm actually okay with that, because once I get this finished and I do the final shrink on it, the 350-degree shrink, I'm going to come back and drop in a reinforcement type of patch, which I had planned on doing regardless. So I'm not too concerned about the open hole here, because like I said, I'll just drop in a nice patch around it, a reinforcing patch anyway. So this is ready to go. Like I said, I'm going to glue it and start on the other side. I'll come around here and see if I can get some of this scallop work here. What I had done to get the scallops, I just used the iron, and I came in here, I had the edge glued, let it dry, and then I came in with the iron turned upside down. That allows you to do concave type of curves, but I just came in here and kind of pre-shrunk this, pulled the wrinkles out of it and heated it to shrink it, and kind of pre-shrunk it around these areas here, and then I trimmed off the excess, and that worked very well. And I tried to keep the glue just on the very edge here. I didn't let the glue come across into here, so that the fabric would make a nice transition from this very end up onto the ribs and off of this reinforcing spruce that's down inside here, and it actually worked out better than I had expected. So alright, so I will move on and start working on that second side. A couple things that I've learned since starting on the vertical stabilizer. You can see here that there's very little glue coming up off of this edge onto the actual surface. I found out when I was doing the vertical stabilizer that this Ecobond glue is really good stuff, and even the slightest amount will really stick to the wood and really stick to the fabric. So if you don't want your fabric matted down, so to speak, on the edges, you need to keep that glue off of it as best you can, and you need to make sure that you keep it nice and wiped, because if you keep a wet edge of glue, when it dries, regardless of how many layers of fabric you put over that, you'll still see that ridge, you'll still see that glue line. And that was something that I wasn't expecting, because I figured, you know, you put this piece of fabric on, you have a little bit of a glue line, so what? The second layer of fabric's going to wrap around and cover that, and then you put your trim tapes on, which is going to cover it. And I've actually got some raised areas that you can see even under the finish tape along some of these edges where I didn't wipe the glue when it was still wet. So those kinds of things you want to watch out for. And these areas here where you cut around these hinges, you know, I just use straight scissors to do these cuts for the fabric because getting pinking shears in here is too difficult. So it frays a little bit, and this is probably blurry, but what I decided to do was I cut the frays as best I can, the loose little strings. But what also helps is if you get the glue on them, they stiffen up a little bit, and you can kind of work them up off of the glue and cut them. But there again, if you leave the little frayed edges kind of laying around, even when you wrap your second layer of fabric and you put your finishing tape over, you can still see that little string underneath all those multiple layers. So you want to try to keep everything really clean, really keep everything wiped nice, keep the glue edges to a minimum, and keep your strings and frays out of the way and trimmed. So alright, let me get back at it here. The other side of this rudder, I had started to attach the fabric around the perimeter, and then I tried to make the slit for the control horn, which proved to be a little bit difficult, and then it dawned on me that I should just make the piece of fabric larger than what I probably really need, and then slit the fabric first, which is what I have just done. So this fabric, as you can see, is quite a bit bigger than the piece that it's going to cover. But I left myself a lot of margin and pre-slit it for the horn. So now with the slit in it, and with the fabric, just laying on top here, I've got plenty to start working around the perimeter, and I think this will prove to be easier than doing the perimeter first and then trying to cut the slit. So I'll try this way next and see what happens. I'm trying to figure out the best way to get this finishing tape on these scallop trailing edges, and I think I may have something figured out, but it's a little early to tell. What I'm doing is I basically crease the tape down the middle. That gives me a center line so that I can line up that crease down the top of this trailing edge to keep the tape centered. And as I do that, I don't know if you can really see it, using the iron, I just barely tack a little bit along the way. So you can see I put the iron on it here, and then I hit it again here, and then here, and I just work my way down and lightly tack it with the iron to hold it in place. When I do that, I hold the edges down like this, and then I tack it. That way it doesn't shrink these loose pieces here. There's no glue on the sides here. I just put glue on the very edge of this trailing edge here. So once I've got this down the length, I'll come back and with glue only, I'll fold these around this way and work it and try to get the wrinkles out. If I need to, I can add a little bit of heat along the way, but I think just by gluing this, it will work. So that's where I'm at now. I'm going to try to get this going and see if that actually works. Here it is so far, and you can see that this end here is fair, and as I progress down the trailing edge, you see more and more wrinkles and bubbles and edges that stick up. And this end down here is probably the worst, because I think that this last little scallop is the smallest and tightest of them all. So you can see that this trailing edge trim piece is not laying nice. However, I'm going to go with it for now. I'm going to let this tack up, and I'm going to come back with the iron and see if I can't tack down and shrink down these bubbles and loose ends. Now I have not done the other side yet. I'm doing this one side at a time, trying to figure out a good method. And I think doing it one side at a time might be best. So this side here is left untouched for the moment. My main goal is to keep this top part here, the actual edge of the trailing edge, nice and flat and crisp as best as I can. And then make sure that I get this stuff here nailed down. Like I said, I'm going to try that with the iron and try to come back through and get some of these gnarly looking creases and loose ends and all that. Alright, so let this dry. I'm going to work on the other elevator a little bit while this is drying, and then see what I can do with it. A quick and dirty method that I use to mark the slit in the fabric for the control horns is this. I cut out the fabric bigger, obviously, than I need it to be, and I lay it down on the bench. I put my piece down on the bench, whatever piece I'm covering, and you can see that I leave a decent amount of fabric around. You know, obviously you don't want to make it too small. And I have the horn itself laying over the edge of the bench. I've got the fabric positioned in relation to the piece the way that I want it. And then what I'll do is I'll just come underneath with a felt tip pen, and I'll just mark the fabric underneath on each side where it needs to be slit. With it positioned this way, the angle of the horn will be positioned correctly too. You can see that the horn is angled in relation to the elevator. So with the piece, with the horn in line with the edge of the table, the elevator kind of comes off at an angle a little bit, and that's okay as long as the fabric is lined up with the piece. And then I just come underneath here, and I'll mark here and I'll mark here right on the fabric, move the piece out of the way, and cut my slit. And I'll do that now. So I believe you can see the two marks that I had made for the horn slit. You can see how they're angled in relation to the overall piece of fabric, which is the way that it should be. And I've got, I don't know if you can see, there's a piece of plywood underneath the fabric just so I can make my cut without cutting my tabletop. And then just using a ruler or some kind of straight edge, I'll line up the dots, make my slit from dot to dot, and then I can lay the fabric back over the piece. And that's pretty much what you end up with. I've got the slit made. I've got it dropped down over the horn. You can see I still have my fabric, plenty of fabric to work with around the perimeter. So now I'm ready to, this piece has already been pre-glued, so now I'm ready to start attaching the fabric around the perimeter and cutting off the excess and getting it all trimmed up. On these pieces that have the scalloped trailing edges, I usually like to work the scalloped edge first. Since the fabric is loose everywhere, it's able to move around and kind of take a set around these scallops that suits it best as I work it with the iron. So I try to leave everything else loose. However, when doing that, I don't want to pull the fabric away from this horn in such a way that it's going to leave a larger than necessary gap around it when I shrink it. So the first thing that I'll do when I get the fabric positioned the way that I like it, I'll just go ahead and I'll tack the fabric in place using the iron right around the horn. That will hold the fabric in place at the horn so that it won't move around out of position too far when I start working the fabric around the trailing edges. So you get the fabric on and tack it around the horn in the glue area prior to work in these scallops so that you don't pull the fabric away from the horn more than necessary.